engaged, that would be ideal. So our goals in the climate action workshops in those tracks are to support organizations in adopting ambitious science-based targets by outlining pathways to achieve goals, to identify and promote specific tangible strategies to accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy, and to empower Midwesterners to take tangible steps to respond to climate change and its impacts. And this week's track is on building cross-sector partnerships to accelerate actions. Our panelists today are exemplars for real and ongoing on-the-ground action, and our moderator is well-renowned for bringing these cross-sector partnerships together. Chris Wheat is our moderator today. He's the Director of Strategy and City Engagement for American Cities Climate Challenge at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Supported by Bloomberg Philanthropies, the Climate Challenge works to accelerate climate policies and programs in 25 cities around the US. Chris joined NRDC after spending 7 years in the office of Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Chris also held several positions in the Emanuel administration, including Director of the Mayor's Innovation Delivery Team, Chicago's Chief Sustainability Officer, and most recently, the Mayor's Chief of Policy. Chris started his career in finance and management consulting. Chris also sits on the board of directors of Chicago Debates, the Chicago Development Commission, and is an executive in residence at the Rostandi Center for Social Sector Innovation. A native of Little Rock, Arkansas, Chris holds a BA from Washington University in St. Louis and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Chris, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Missy, and good to be with all of you. Nice to be virtually home today, but really excited and really proud of the work that Phil Valco and Washington University have taken over the last few years on sustainability, and really excited to participate in this summit. I also want to acknowledge a couple of my former counterparts, Catherine Werner and Barbara Buffalo, who are sustainability directors in Missouri and are doing really great work on climate. So I'm going to take an opportunity to introduce our panel. We're going to ask, I've got a couple of questions for our panelists, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A, and my partner in crime, MK, will help us facilitate that. So if you have questions in the chat, please feel free to put them in. So let's talk about our panel. So first, we'd like to talk about Amy Frederigo. With nearly 25 years of experience in policy and systemic approaches to energy, water, and other sustainability efforts, Amy currently serves as Managing Director of the Minnesota Sustainable Growth Coalition at the Environmental Initiative. The coalition represents Fortune 500 companies headquartered in Minnesota that are leaders in corporate sustainability. Amy has also served as Xcel's Energy Manager of Resource Planning and Strategy for External State Affairs, as Executive Director of the Midwest Renewable Energy Tracking System, and Vice President of the Cooperative Network, a business trade association working with cooperatives in the upper Midwest. She also has held positions as a legislative aide for the U.S. Senate and researcher for the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. Amy has consulted internationally on several USAID-funded partnerships, most recently in Mexico, to assist with federal energy reform. In 2016, she was recognized as a clean leader for Minnesota women by the Clean Energy Resource Team and the Business Journal's 25 Women to Watch Award in 2010. She received a master's degree in environmental policy from the George Washington University and an economics degree from the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. In her free time, she enjoys Nordic skiing. I don't know how you can get more Minnesota than that. Wilderness backpacking, paddling, and playing the fiddle. Now let me turn to Mike Shelton, who's the Associate Director of the Sustainability Institute at The Ohio State University. Mike joined Ohio State's Sustainability Institute in May 2017, and prior to joining the university, he managed corporate social responsibility and sustainability efforts for the Scotts Miracle-Gro Company and as Chief of the Office of External Affairs for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. During his tenure at the department, Mike negotiated the enactment of numerous pieces of legislation, including the state's ratification of the Great Lakes Compact. Mike also served as an executive assistant for regulatory agencies in the governor's and as the assistant director of government relations. at the Nature Conservancy's Ohio chapter. While the Nature Conservancy, Mike led a variety of initiatives to advance the protection and restoration of Ohio's natural habitat, including the establishment of the Clean Ohio Fund, a $400 million state bond initiative to protect natural areas, agricultural open space and multi-use trails, and restore urban brownfields. Mike served as a legislative commission fellow at the Ohio Senate and graduated with a BA in sociology from Kenyon College. He and his wife Jenna, are learning about patience from their 2 daughters and toddler son. And last but not least, want to introduce Joe Parisi, who's the executive for Dane County, Wisconsin. Joe has called Dane County home his entire life. He sought out his public service as a way to give back to the community that has given so much to Jim. Joe was first elected as county executive, the chief elected leader of Dane County in 2011. After 6 years in the state assembly and 8 years as Dane County clerk. Joe's priority is to ensure that everyone in the community has access to the opportunity to succeed. He believes in investing in people. He believes that investing in people pays big dividends, and knows that this can work because he's experienced it. Now, Joe believes it's his turn to give back to ensure that our children's generation have access to the same opportunities that are available to him. Joe and his wife, Erin, are raising their 2 daughters on Madison's east side. With a population of more than 500,000 and an annual county budget of over $600 million, Dane County is Wisconsin's 2nd largest county and has the highest private sector job and population growth in Wisconsin. So thank you all very much to the panelists for joining us today. If I could actually start with you, Executive. Talk to us a little bit about how you and Dane County have approached climate action, particularly as it pertains to partnerships. Talk about how you've built coalitions and also some of the challenges you face.
Hey, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. And as I mentioned when we met the other day, I really appreciate all of the work of the NRDC. You're a great organization to which I've belonged for probably 30 years. So thanks for all of your great work. Hey, thanks everyone for being here today and inviting me to talk a little bit. As Chris mentioned, for those of you who don't know, Dane County is kind of a microcosm of the Midwest, really. We're a little over 500,000 people. Half of our population is the city of Madison, surrounded by suburbs and small towns, and then a lot of agriculture, mostly dairy farming. So when we look at climate change and energy issues in Dane County, the first thing we want to do is walk the walk, because we believe you need to lead by example before you can go out and tell other people what they should be doing. So over the past 10 years, we have invested literally millions of dollars every year, $2 to $3 million every year, in energy efficiency programming for county facilities. We have county buildings, from office buildings to a medical examiner's building to highway garages throughout the county. And today we've increased energy efficiency a tremendous amount. And once we got to that level, we went to the next kind of rung in the hierarchy, which is doing renewable energy. And right now we have over 17 county facilities that have solar arrays on them. We are nearing completion of an 8 megawatt, 60-acre solar field on our airport property. And next year we'll be building another solar field about twice that size, about 16 megawatts, which will bring us to 100% offset, renewable offset for the electricity that county government uses every day. We also invest heavily in land restoration, wetland and prairie restoration for numerous reasons, to protect the environment, to protect our water quality from runoff, and to help provide more carbon sinks. So not only are we cutting down on our carbon, we're working to do everything we can to draw it from the air. So where some of the partnerships come in have to do with how we've developed a lot of our renewable programming. We work with, as I mentioned, there's a lot of ag in Dane County. And so we have worked with our farmers, and the county has played a facilitation role to bring farmers and investors together to develop manure digesters. And these have 2 really important aspects to them. They help our farmers farm sustainably, give them something to do with the manure that dairy cows produce. It reduces 60 to 100% of the phosphorus in the manure, which when it goes through the process of anaerobic digestion and separation, which helps our water quality. But then what we do is they take the methane gas which everyone here knows is a powerful greenhouse gas that's produced. And one of the facilities burns that and generates renewable electricity. And the other is taking advantage of a new partnership that we've just developed out on our landfill site. And before I tell you what the digester does, I'll just touch on that briefly, and I can go into further detail later on any of this. We also have a county-owned landfill, and we went into partnership last year with a company, and we invested $26 million to build a facility on our landfill that collects the methane from the landfill, cleans it, and compresses it, and sells it as bio-CNG through Wisconsin-based Quick Trip Corporation. This is, aside from 100% solar-generated electric vehicles, this is the cleanest transportation fuel available. And we will be bringing in several $1 millions in profit a year to the county based on what we sell it for and renewable energy credits that are available to us for that. So it's helping a local business, Quick Trip. It's providing a market for our what would have been a waste product at the landfill. And then because we're doing this, this is allowing one of our digesters to do the same thing now, because the good news of solar and wind power coming down in price is great for all of us, but it's made the methane generated renewable electricity not be able to compete, and the utilities don't want to buy it anymore. And that threatened the viability of the digesters. So when we built our facility, we built it with an offloading station so that now these digesters can take advantage of the opportunity that we have to sell this fuel and remain even more economically viable before. And so that's going to allow us to increase our partnerships with our farmers. And we hope to develop an additional at least half dozen digesters over the next few years, just because of this switch in this economic model. Chris, you can tell me if you'd like me to pause here and talk about more things later or continue. I don't want to take everyone's time.
No, there's a lot of good stuff there, and let's hold some of that for further in the conversation. I want to turn it over to some of our counterparts on the panel. Mike, let me turn it over to you. First, let me compliment you on smartly picking up, going outside and enjoying whatever little fall we're going to have this year. So you're smarter than many of us. But similar question to you. Talk about your approach to Ohio State's approach around climate, in particular, how you think about the partnership space, both opportunities and challenges.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. And I appreciate being outside on a plus 70-degree weather day, but really it's a function of having 3rd and 4th grade classes occurring in my house right now. So to spare you all from those lessons, I've moved outside. But in terms of Ohio State and in our office specifically at the Sustainability Institute, we're really focused on advancing the university's established sustainability goals, which include carbon neutrality by 2050. But our goals, including carbon neutrality, stretch across the university's mission. So that includes teaching and learning, research and innovation with our faculty members, outreach and engagement with external and internal partners, and then resource stewardship, which is kind of the on-campus facilities aspect of our sustainability programming. And so that by its nature generates a lot of internal collaboration and partnership building that has to occur. We have numerous offices on campus that do some kind of sustainability work. So we help to try to coordinate that and help everyone move in the right direction and get resources where they're needed. And then specifically regarding carbon neutrality, earlier this year, our office helped lead the update to the university's climate action plan to map out how we can address over half of our existing missions by the end of this decade. And a couple of years ago, the university entered into a long-term public-private partnership to manage our campus energy use that's bringing considerable new capital investments to the university, particularly our Columbus campus, our flagship campus, to make our campus more energy efficient. Certainly as a public institution, capital funding can be difficult to come by, and maintain our buildings is often difficult. So that partnership is really helping to invest in a more efficient campus for us. In terms of outside the university's four walls, so to speak, we do a significant amount of partnership, as you might imagine, with the city of Columbus, where our Columbus campus is centrally located. So we've had a lot of our faculty and researchers engage with the city to develop, things like the city's first climate adaptation plan, which was kind of a precursor to now the city's existing effort to establish their own climate action plan to address their newly announced climate or carbon neutrality goal by 2050. We also partner a considerable amount with our regional planning commission, so it's beyond just the city and beyond just the county we're situated in, but I think it's a 12 county region or so here in central Ohio that is part of our regional planning commission. And just last week, the university worked with them to launch a new a digital sustainability dashboard for the region to give more transparency to the public, but also indicate where we're not doing so well on a lot of different measures and where there's opportunities for improvement for our Central Ohio residents. In terms of challenges, this is not easy work, so they're really endless and they really depend upon what source emissions you're kind of targeting and talking about. But one thing I will say that's very different between the university itself and the city we're situated in and the region we're in is that a lot of our emissions, almost 3/4 of the profile of our emissions come from building energy use, and a little less than 1/4 is related to transportation sector emissions, whereas the city and the region are much more transportation emission driven. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what's a priority for the university campus versus what's more of a priority for the region and city. So, we're trying to help find and partner in ways to help the city and region address those emissions, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit further in the dialogue.
Thanks for that, Mike. We have the good fortune of working with Mayor Ginther in Columbus and Alana Shockey, the sustainability director there. Your point about where the emissions are is really critical, I think, in cities. So compare the Columbus footprint to Chicago, where actually Chicago's biggest buildings, 50,000 square feet and above, put out more carbon emissions than every car, truck, and bus. And so you go where the emissions are, and so it then can change the profile of the work we're doing. But we'll talk more about that. Amy, let me turn to you. A similar question. It feels like the essence of what you do is partnership. So talk a little bit about how you have approached that, and I think you also have some slides and some visuals to share with us.
Great, thanks, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Great, and thanks to Washington University as well for convening the Midwest Climate Summit. This has just been fabulous. And good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Amy Fredrigel, and I'm the Managing Director of the Sustainable Growth Coalition. We are a program area of a 30-year-old nonprofit called Environmental Initiative. Our mission statement is to catalyze collaboration across perspectives, power, and systems for social equity and environmental health. The Sustainable Growth Coalition, which you see a slide up here with our members, is a corporate sustainability leadership network fostering cross-sector collaboration to advance a circular economy as a more prosperous alternative to our current linear economy. The coalition works to elevate the business case for circularity across systems, including materials, water, and energy, by coming together for something greater than ourselves. We work to create a more resilient economy and advance social, racial, and economic equity by cultivating conversations across differences. As you can see on this slide, our members include Fortune 500 companies whose global headquarters are in Minnesota, as well as other regionally based private and public sector leaders. Our chair is Shane Stennis from the University of Minnesota, and he is joining us here for this breakout session as well. One specific area of emphasis for us is energy. Coalition members have adopted an energy vision that seeks to equitably decarbonize across the energy system. So Kathy, you can switch to the next slide, please. This vision includes working to ensure access to clean energy for all to tackle racial and social disparities. Our energy focal areas are conservation, clean energy generation, electrification, optimized energy systems, meaning both distribution and transmission, and carbon capture and use. Many members have set impressive individual science-based energy and climate goals for their enterprises stretching across the globe. And these voluntary goals go above and beyond state and national policies because they are actually devised to meet science-based targets to prevent global climate change. To meet these goals, some of our work includes partnering with utilities on long-range utility integrated resource planning. We foster collaboration and partnerships between utilities and utility customers, and a recent example is a pilot project with Target Corporation and Xcel Energy, for which we published a case study to help large businesses whose footprints can stretch across the entire country and work with hundreds of utilities. And what this case study does is help them more accurately and easily report out on their greenhouse gas emissions. And what that does is increase transparency and accuracy with consumers and other stakeholders. We're working on raising the awareness with stakeholders as well about the need for additional transmission infrastructure in the mid-continent region to make the space for renewables on the grid. This is to help meet our global greenhouse gas reduction goals. And through these conversations, we hope to advance equity in rural communities and tribal nations by understanding their perspectives. Another area of partnership that's come up already is electrification, such as in the transportation sector, which is now the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions, at least in Minnesota, and I know in many other states. We have a member team working on tackling systemic gaps and barriers, preventing us from electrifying corporate fleets, public transit, and other shared mobility options to ensure that the workers of our region can get to good paying jobs and hopefully increasingly green jobs. And then you can go to my last slide, please. So in just another thought about our approach to climate action is that we represent a variety of sectors, from manufacturing of durable goods to utilities to healthcare, and we seek to understand what motivates stakeholders, the challenges they face, and how we can be more successful together by meeting both multiple short and long-term value streams as we work together. Our collaboration means welcoming voices from across perspectives, communities, and sectors. And we do a lot of facilitation of stakeholders, and we are increasingly really trying to ask what voices are not at the table and what communities do we need to be building relationships and trust with to understand their perspective. An example is we recently adopted transmission guiding principles as an example of how different industries can come together. So this was an example of utilities and utility customers coming together to collaborate and tackle systemic challenges that we can't solve on our own. Just lastly, I wanted to mention that Chris was asking about what challenges we face. And one interesting challenge is that the voice of business is really not uniform. And we really want to highlight that these businesses that we work with, many of them are very large, some of them are medium-sized, and then many others in between, smaller ones as well, support clean energy and climate policy. Contrary to what you might hear from some advocacy organizations, we work to support a supportive environment for policy by sharing the good news that many large employers and household brand names that are big businesses are supportive of clean energy and climate. So that's why when we testified at the Capitol in this picture here last winter, we shared those themes, and also during legislative events that we hosted this spring right before COVID hit to role model that leadership. So these are just a few examples of leadership on collaboration and partnership, and I'm looking forward to our discussion and your questions. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you for that, Amy. And just to be clear, in the interest of full disclosure, NRDC is one of those advocacy organizations that spends a lot of time poking and prodding, but that's okay. And Amy, you mentioned the engagement you're doing going into COVID, and let me maybe put another question to you and be interested, Mike and executive, for your thoughts as well. I mean, obviously, COVID has created a global upheaval in terms of the way that we interact and we work. Talk a little bit from your perspective and the businesses that you work with about how the universe of the possible and sometimes even the universe of the necessary has changed over the last 7 months. And then Mike and Executive, I'll go to you as well.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thanks so much for NRDC's work. Joe mentioned this earlier as well, and it takes a village. We have a nice kind of push-pull between all the different organizations that are involved in energy and climate. So thanks for the poking and the prodding. So we believe, I mentioned a little bit that we use a systemic approach, and we believe that a systems approach, a societal approach to the challenging issues of the day can result in stronger, more resilient economy and communities. So right after COVID really, broke out, at least in our part of the world, we adopted circularity guiding principles, and I can share a link to them later on. And these were aimed at 4 key cross-cutting themes and approaches, which were to promote economic development, advance equity and inclusion, protect the environment, using a systems approach. And so those are the 4 things that we've been really focusing on since COVID hit. And rebuilding the economy around these circularity principles, we call them, can just lead to a much more resilient, inclusive, and competitive world. And so we are collaborating at kind of the nexus, we call the nexus between systems, so energy, water, materials, it could be food, agriculture, transportation, you name it. And to illustrate this approach, we are publishing some member action stories and some case studies. And we're having a webinar on November 18th, if anybody's interested in joining us. But I think that you meant, thinking of the universe since COVID hit and how this has changed. One thing that I've been really impressed with is that a lot of people are joining the systems party, I call it. I'm seeing messages and themes or texts from friends talking about how we need a systems approach to tackle these global challenges. Of course, since George Floyd was killed, there's so much talk about the systemic institutionalized racism that we have across so many different parts of our world. And so I think that now that we're talking more about systems, I hear a little bit more knowledge of circularity and just the normalization of the racial and social injustices that we have, and the importance of working at the intersection of those issues together is something that I've really noticed since COVID-19 hit.
Great, thank you for that. Mike, being on a college campus, is definitely an interesting dynamic. So talk a little bit about how you thought about the universe as possible.
Yeah, in terms of what's necessary, climate action has seen a need to accelerate action for a long time. That was true before the pandemic, and it's certainly true now. So I'm not sure what is necessary has changed all that much, but in terms of what is possible, it's interesting. We've learned a lot about our operations on the campus as the university was shut down most of the spring and through the summer. And so that's provided us an opportunity to change how we manage our building energy use patterns. And we're going to continue that moving forward. So we're kind of institutionalized some of the learnings that we had over the past few months. And really through relatively simple things like changing building set points and other measures, we're anticipating a 5 to 10% total carbon footprint emission reduction on an annual basis moving forward, just by changing how we manage building energy use. And then further, some of our colleagues in our operational team and our Med Center team, particularly the Med Center folks who have realized real positive patient engagement through telehealth, they've started to engage a dialogue with our human resource leaders about a longer term work from home policy that would help contain our commuter emissions and potentially long term reduce the need for more built space over time, so that if we can be more smarter with sharing space on campus that we already have, and thus kind of reduce the curve of additional energy need that we need to power our buildings as we have less people on campus on a daily basis. So if we can take some of that learning and some of those positive experiences that people have had from a work from home or a work like a telehealth situation, and make those longer term institutionalized policies then we can get some permanent gains from a climate perspective out of this really terrible pandemic situation.
Thanks for that, Mike. And Executive, you're very much on the front lines of what's happening with COVID, and I think nationwide we're seeing some of the numbers come out of Wisconsin. So you're very much having to walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. So talk to us about how you manage that, and where does climate fit into that?
Yeah, so a couple of examples, and one, like Columbus, we've realized within Dane County operations that we can do a lot of what we do virtually. So in 2021, when hopefully we're on the other side of the worst of what we're experiencing right now, we have plans to launch an initiative to really dive deep into the virtual workforce and how much we can maintain virtually of what we've been doing, and how we can utilize this moving forward for the same reasons, not only to reduce carbon emissions from travel, but also to reduce the need to build more buildings, or even to be using some of the buildings that we are now. The other piece, that the kind of opportunity this has presented in the midst of something really terrible, is to demonstrate the multiple benefits of clean energy. We all know that people who are subjected to air pollution are more vulnerable to the impacts potentially of COVID. We also have tens of thousands of people just in our community alone, like everyone else, out of work right now. And in the midst of all this that is going on, with people losing their jobs, with our food pantries overwhelmed, et cetera, we have people working, installing clean energy projects as we speak. We are building that 60-acre solar field. Had we just, plugged the meter and bought more, coal-fired power off the grid, all that money would be just floating out of Wisconsin, and it wouldn't be helping our workers. But we're able to invest in the community and in the workforce, and not only help the environment, but keep those dollars circulating within Dane County. And I'll just quickly tell you, in addition to paying the workers and the companies who are installing that for us, the deal we made with MG&E with that solar field was, we'll lease you the land to build this. We promise we'll buy all of the energy from you. And by the way, we want to pay less. And they're able to do it because of the economics of solar. And Dane County government and our taxpayers will save over $150,000 the first year that installation is up and running. So, we're looking at possibilities, and again, using it as an opportunity to point out the real life-changing benefits of investing in local renewable energy.
Thank you for that, Executive. I think just a couple thoughts on some of the things we're seeing at the city perspective. As similar to what you said, Executive. This is the epitome of a natural experiment in terms of what is possible. And as my former boss Rahm Emanuel is apt to say, never let a crisis go to waste. And so, what are the things that you can accomplish as a part of this? I think at the same time, and I know you're feeling this, is that there is a question of, are we basically in a cycle of permanent austerity in government and government budgets and spending? So if you look at some early work from the National League of Cities, if you look at the decline in municipal revenues during the Great Recession, it was really over a period of, let's call it 6 years or so. We're going to see that full decline before the end of the year. And so, there's a huge question about, what do we support, what do we fund, and how do we manage that versus, the huge expenditures that local governments have had to put out, and frankly, without help coming from DC. How do we kind of manage those responsibilities? Let's turn to some questions that we're seeing in the chat. We're having a lot of great questions there. Amy, I'm going to turn the first one to you, but I do want to open it up in general to the panel as a whole. And it's about climate adaptation. I spend very little time on adaptation in my life, and so I definitely want to save a seat for Yahweh here as well. So talk about your partners in the corporate community and how they think about their role in terms of climate adaptation strategies. And then Executive and Mike, want to turn that question to you as well.
Thanks for the question, Chris. And I'm also happy to kind of be weave in a few thoughts reflecting on some of the other chat box questions from Phil and Rebecca and others too. So the coalition was actually founded because 8 companies and members of our organization, Environmental Initiative, came to our CEO and said, we happen to have this fabulous leadership and culture in Minnesota, not only of civic participation, we always have very high voter participation rates, but also of sustainability. And that's really how we were formed. It wasn't something we thought of to conjure up kind of advocacy in the corporate community. They came to us and said, how can we go farther, faster together by tackling these systemic gaps and barriers that we can't do alone, which is actually something that, to mention, some of the other organizations, fabulous other organizations that are in the landscape that we're in. So when we do our systems approach, I mentioned our energy version earlier, part of our process is to, when we think about gaps and barriers we want to tackle in advancing our energy vision, first we do sort of a landscape scan. So what are all the other complementary organizations out there doing fabulous work like NRDC, like AIA, lots of other organizations that were mentioned in the chat box. And so we kind of map that out so that we're leveraging and complementing and not duplicating or conflicting. And so how can we, what is our unique value proposition and niche that we want to add? I guess my main thought on adaptation is actually that we're about prevention. Let's prevent climate change. And so that's why our members have really strong, many global climate goals. And I mentioned that they're science-based, to work back from whatever percentage their company, there's organizations that do this called SBTI, science-based targets, where based on your footprint of your company through the various uses of energy you have and your supply chain, your value chains, and your end-use customer use of your products and services, what portion of emissions reductions does your company need to do to keep the globe at under 1.5 or 2 degrees of warming? And so those are the science-based targets that increasingly many companies are adopted. And there's a lot of transparency in this. If you haven't seen some of the reports through CDP, like this SBTI, those are great resources to really hold each other accountable and have that public transparency. And so I guess that's my main thought on adaptation, is that we're focusing on prevention. And of course, I know there's a lot of great work being done on adaptation. We're just not doing a whole lot of it ourselves. So I'll leave that question for somebody else.
Sure, of course. Executive, let me turn to you about how you think about issues of adaptation in Door County.
Yeah, so in Dane County, as county government, obviously we do have to look at mitigation because we're responsible for helping to keep people safe. And like so much of the Midwest, we have experienced horrendous flooding the last few years. A few years ago, there was loss of lives, loss of homes, loss of businesses. So what we did, shortly after I came to office, we partnered with the University of Wisconsin and we asked them to model locally for us what we could expect from climate change, because we know a lot about the global impacts that we see that, so as far as, from emergency management, helping folks to our human services department, we needed to know, because we wanted to build that into our strategic planning and our COOP planning, our continuation of operation planning. And what they told us is what most folks on this call know already, is that we're going to see warmer and wetter weather, and we're going to see rainfalls like we never have before. And that certainly came true within within years of that initial forecast. So what we did with that information is we shared that with all of our various departments. So the Human Services Department, we have to care for homeless folks. We help people who are lower income. We help people who are on the streets. What are these changes going to do to their life situations with more 90+ degree days, with more heavy downfalls? So we weave that into our daily operations. How does our emergency management and our sheriff's department prepare to respond to flooding? What does our highway department do when it comes time to replace a culvert with roads that have been washing out? When we build in that infrastructure. And then we reach out to our other partners. Again, I mentioned, that the agricultural interests throughout Dane County has such an impact on our water resources. Dane County has 4 lakes that go right through the city of Madison, and being surrounded by ag makes that a challenge because of the phosphorus runoff. And so we've doubled down on our efforts to promote continuous cover versus row cropping. We've worked with our farmers to help them implement more, we refer to them as grass rivers, for example. So if there are areas that there's runoff and gullies happen, through fields, during a big rain event, we work with them to plant that in perennial grasses if there's still going to be row cropping, et cetera. So it's really become part of our strategic planning in almost everything that we're responsible for.
Thanks. And Mike, Ohio State is a 24-hour a day, 7 days a week institution. It never stops. How have you all thought about adaptation, knowing that there's really never a moment of pause in terms of how Ohio State runs?
Yeah, and I would echo a lot of the comments out of Dane County there in terms of not just how the university operates, but I referenced the university's work with the city of Columbus to develop their first climate adaptation plan, and very similar things coming out of our state climatologist office and related climate researchers is that we anticipate, like I'm sure most of the Midwest, increased heavy storm events and increased number of days above 90 degrees, and a decrease correspondingly in our shoulder seasons, spring and fall. And so for our urban community, that translates into how do we maintain infrastructure that can withstand flooding, that can handle stormwater sewer overflows and things of that nature. But also on the increase of hot days, particularly for our economically challenged neighborhoods, how are we going to provide cooling centers when they can't afford air conditioning or don't have air conditioning in their homes already? So, how is the city and how is the region going to prepare for keeping those citizens safe, from an environmental justice standpoint? And then certainly as the university, it's the state's land grant institution, we operate a extension office, and we have a really robust outreach program to the state's agricultural community on climate change specifically, kind of demonstrating to the agricultural community what anticipated changes in weather patterns are expected and that we're already seeing. And how does that translate to their planting rotation? How does that translate to their business planning? And that has been very well received, really, by the ag community. And I think they are that program is kind of by request, and the backlog of requests is so long that our extension staff can't possibly meet it with the staffing that they have. So that's really good to see the ag community kind of reaching out and wanting this information and helping them think about how to manage and adapt to climate over time.
Thanks for that. One thought I have, and then we'll go to another question, is, COVID has served as almost a dress rehearsal in terms of what response looks like to extreme events, for better or worse. And I think one of the things that we're seeing also are the structural inequities that can happen in terms of our response. Thinking about, in May, and, unfortunate to be somewhat morbid, we're concerned about kind of going in this now, when at the height of infections and unfortunately hospitalizations and deaths in Chicago and many of our cities, with a disproportion of those happening in Black and Latinx communities, it reminded many of us in Chicago of the '95 heat wave, and in particular how people are connected. One of the things we saw in the '95 heat wave were that, in particularly Black males had a much higher rate of death than Black females. And often we saw it because it was older Black males. Not only did they not have air conditioning, they were not connected to a block club. They were not connected to a church. There wasn't someone, in a church doing a sick and shut-in call for those individuals as well. Fast forward to today, we had a pretty hot summer in Chicago. You now would traditionally open up a cooling center. But how do you open up a cooling center with social distancing? Where traditionally we would open up our senior centers and libraries and other places. But how are you kind of doing that while for our most vulnerable residents, that you're concerned about issues of connection as well. And so I do think that COVID has shown both the ability to respond, but also the deficits and the places where we need to work. Connected to that, one of the questions I wanted to open up, and maybe Executive, I'll throw this question to you first, is the concept of connecting of economic power and thinking about partnerships between businesses and organizations that do have power, and power means a lot of different things, with grassroots community organizations and others who may have less political power. And often I would suspect you sit at the epicenter of those types of discussions. So talk to us about how your thinking has evolved and how you try to manage those issues. And then I'll turn to the rest of the panel.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, for me, it starts as basically as everyone has to be at the table from the beginning. We don't need a table full of people who already have privilege deciding how they're going to fix everything for everyone else, right? I mean, everyone has to be at the table. So one of the things we did in Dane County is we've put together over the past few years our own climate action plan, and we're pretty excited because it was recently finished and we're in the implementation stage. But for example, at that table from the beginning were people from the business community, utilities, the university, businesses, environmental organizations, and we had representation from the Urban League, from a local organization called Centro Hispano, folks from community groups. And one of the interesting things that came from that, and this wasn't even part of the formal plan, although we have other partnerships like this I could talk about, was at one of the first meetings, there was a person from SunPeak solar installers there, and they were listening to the representative from the Urban League talking about their job training programs. And you all of a sudden had in the same room a business that was looking for qualified workers and a community-based organization that was preparing people for the workforce. And they've made a marriage that has created a steady pipeline now for SunPeak of people who had been working with the Urban League, many of whom had had some challenges in their past, were formerly incarcerated, et cetera. So on that very basic level, just being able to make those connections and really, doing more than just doing outreach, but creating pipelines. But then once those pipelines happen, to be sure that we're not just satisfied with getting someone an entry-level job. And then that's the next step, is how do we move people up in organizations also and give a pathway to the top. We have a partnership with a local organization, community-based organization called Operation Fresh Start. When I say we, Dane County, they work with young people ages 17 through 24, many of whom are formerly incarcerated. Most have dropped out of high school. Some kids who have had some really challenging times. And we work with them. We hire crews of a dozen of those young people, and they do conservation work in our parks, and they learn skills through that work and we also hire them as LTEs in the Parks Department that prepares them and gives them the resume they need to apply for jobs, for example, in our Parks Department and in other areas. And so we really work to create pipelines to real employment. And when you look at the nuts and bolts there, they're not that challenging to put together when you have jobs that the exact qualifications for, and people involved in training programs and people who are looking for work. So we do everything we can to create those types of pipelines to provide people opportunity.
Yeah, Chris, I can chime in on that one as well.
Please.
We at Environmental Initiative, we believe that all environmental issues are issues of equity, race, and justice. And actually, Dana Slade is in this workshop session. I can see his video here. He is from Health Partners. He's one of our founders, actually, of the Sustainable Growth Coalition. And he's one of our equity champions for our organization. And it's actually one of the reasons why our vision statements, I showed our energy vision earlier, has language about diversity, equity, inclusion. We have other vision statements as well on materials and the water system, because we think it's really important to be engaging, listening, and learning from communities and working together to build trust and bridge across differences. So a big part of what we're doing right now is to build intercultural competencies with our members. And we're all, as speaking as a white person, I can just speak for myself, and that we're all on a learning journey right now, which begins with self-awareness for myself as a white person of power and privilege because of the color of my skin, that we're working on trying to be more self-aware. So as we continue to understand the vision that communities have for themselves and center the visions that they have, ultimately to help build community-based assets and ownership and wealth, so that in our effort to, build back better, we're actually investing in the systems. We're not investing in systems that just reinforce the current power and privilege and institutionalized racism that we have. So from the business perspective, one thing that we're trying to do is really scaffold our way kind of to the C-suite, to the CEO level, to folks that are all across the spectrum, working in the public and the private sectors. So one example is that in December, we're having an executive level conversation about the intersection between equity and circularity, particularly with leaders in the HR and the sustainability field, and how our work to advance all of these values together aren't siloed in HR in sort of a diversity hiring check the box effort that really doesn't change culture or adapt or really do anything to meet the long-term outcomes that we're going for.
Thanks for
Chris,
that. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, Chris, I would just say that you're absolutely right at that. I think the pandemic has exacerbated fault lines that have already existed and were already a challenge to deal with. Your example of the cooling centers in Chicago and needing for social distance reminds me of, and you're probably familiar with this given your work with Mayor Ginther and the City of Columbus, but a priority for the city has been this longer term partnership we call Smart Columbus regarding transitioning our transportation system not only to one that's emitting less emissions, but also one that's creating economic opportunity in a more equitable manner, helping to match where the population is to where the job centers are. And, even with, that our existing transportation systems aren't really adequate, I would say, from a standpoint in central Ohio and the city. But then when you have to distance on bus lines and other transportation systems, that just means there's less access to those opportunities. So, I think that the pandemic has really affected pretty much every aspect that we're working on in this regard, and hopefully we'll get through it over the next few months. But it's really highlighted some faults that we have.
Thanks for that, Mike. And just one flag. I think this reckoning is not only happening in academic institutions and in the corporate level and the government level. It's frankly happening in environmental organizations as well. It's something that we are wrestling with as an organization at NRDC, and I think a lot of kind of the larger kind of more mainline organizations have been doing that. And how do we think about our power and our influence in these discussions, and in particular, kind of what is the gap, right? I think often we think about we have a technical problem or a policy problem, but often what we really have is a community and political problem, and that may ultimately be the larger barrier to climate action. And then what role do we as an organization, others play as a part of that? I want to continue to encourage folks to put questions in the chat. We do have a few more minutes. I'm going to maybe direct a couple questions specifically to a few folks. So Zeka, let me go to you first. And I know you mentioned this a little bit. Talk a little more about how you're engaging with the farming community and the way you focus on those types of partnerships. Is it about financials? Is it about kind of where we are in the economy? What are some of the driving forces in some of those discussions?
Yeah, so as folks know, I mean, the ag community in general is not real trusting of government. And, you knock on the door and say, I'm from the county, I'm here to help you. You don't get a great response. So we have done and continue to do a lot of relationship building. And we have great relationships with a core group of farmers who refer to themselves as Yahara Pride Farms. And these are folks who live kind of up the watershed from our first big lake, that everything that goes into that lake goes into our entire chain of lakes. And so we've worked with them, and there's been financial assistance through grants, no interest loans, sharing of technology to help them implement these cutting edge practices, and then help them work farmer to farmer to show the advantages of these practices. Because when soil's not running off into the streams and the lakes, it's staying on the ground, and that's where they need it. So there's that cultural shift that has to happen that's kind of beyond politics, that learning trust, and then the slow march of farmer to farmer for implementing these processes. And we've also helped, as I think I mentioned earlier, farmers, we call it a continuous cover program, where this year there's $1.75 million in my budget to help farmers convert to grazing if they have crops in row crops. And so, we want to give them that boost. If they want to do it but don't have the resources, then they benefit. It's a more sustainable practice. And then those are kind of the lower tech partnerships. And then the higher tech, again, is our kind of convening role that we've played with developing these manure digesters. We find the investors, usually angel investors. One of our latest is from California. And we've used the relationships we have with our farmers to bring these folks together to say, this is what could be, and then to develop in conjunction with all of the players, the plans, and then bring these digesters to reality. So, I can't stress, as other folks I think have here too, how important just relationship building and trust building is, because, while Dane County's only 500,000 people, it's a really diverse group of folks we have. I mean, part of my day, I'm down in the core of the city, and in the afternoon, I'm standing out in the middle of a cornfield. But seeing the commonality that we all have and sharing that with people is really key to building these sustainable relationships. Because look, a lot of folks who we want to work with on change are going to feel attacked and going to be put on the defensive. And so if we approach this from a place of understanding and relationship building and seeing the goodness in people, I don't mean to sound Pollyanna, but really I think that's the kind of world we all want, we could really make a big difference. And we have seen that happen here in Dane County.
Yeah, I think the area, thanks for that, Executive. I think the area of agriculture and farming is maybe one of the clearest examples of what can be the gap between the policy and the practical. If as my old boss used to call, the propeller heads can come up with a lot of good ideas in white papers and memos, but what does that actually mean on the ground? Amy, can I maybe turn to you? One question was there around kind of working with specific businesses versus working with large organizations or trade organizations. Talk about kind of some of the pros and cons you see, I'm sure, in your everyday work around this.
Sure, and that was a little bit of what I mentioned about the landscape scan that we do as part of our systems approach. Is we talk about, so what is the problem, what is the vision, what are the gaps and barriers along the course of the way, and getting between status quo and our visionary aspirational state. And then we sort of do an asset scan and a landscape scan, and that's where we look at what all of the other fabulous organizations are that are doing great work in that space and how we'd want to partner together. Because really the genesis of why our organization came together were things that you cannot do by working alone. We can only tackle, think of climate, racism, things that we cannot unfortunately tackle these as individuals. And so businesses, different organizations, public sector, NGO sector, all of the groups, communities are how we work together. We have a new approach that we call sort of 4Q, which is a sort of acronym or a handy reference to the 4 quadrants of sort of society, meaning hopefully communities first, NGO sector, public sector, and private sector. And so weaving together all of these different perspectives and understanding the different voices and working across those differences and honoring those differences. To your, I guess, more specific point about small business, large businesses, we all have different, we call them kind of levers for change. We always pretend we're kind of pulling on a lever. Some of the thought leaders that we follow in a systems perspective methodology talk about at least 8 known levers for change to make true transformative, sustainable, long-term change. Policy is one of them, access to innovative solutions, business model transformation, platforms for things like trading RECs or carbon offsets is another example. Another policy for lever for just systems change is sort of like a certification or a rating. Organic certification is a great example of that type of systems change. So it's all part of the cornucopia of approaches that we need, because these are really complex societal level challenges we're all tackling together. So it's all on the table.
Thank you for that. One of the questions that I'm happy to take on a little bit and open up to other folks, there was a question about thinking about the effects of flooding in urban areas and communities of color. thinking back to my past life in the city of Chicago, this is a tricky one because, low-income communities and communities of color, often you can't just pay to have someone get all the water out of the basement every time it floods. And if we think that the 10-year flood is coming every 2 years, how do we manage that? A couple of things that we worked on and thought about was, one, how do we use more assets in the community, particularly around resilience, in terms of better controlling flooding. So a great organization in Chicago that's done work around the country is the Healthy Schools Coalition, which is actually focused on reimagining and redoing playgrounds and schools, and actually preparing them to take on water and actually kind of being sources of flooding. And the reason for that is that if the water is in the playground that isn't getting used, then it's not in your house. And so it actually creates a real opportunity, as the executive was talking about earlier, to bring a lot of voices to the table. So bringing students, bringing parents to the table in terms of reimagining that, and thinking about the stack of investments where we're able to work with our water reclamation district because it is a source of to help with flooding, and also thinking about investments in parks and other areas. I think one of the real big things that we focused on in Chicago was thinking about our public assets and how are we better managing those for multiple uses, not just as playgrounds or as streets, but also preparing them for flooding issues. We are close to time, and I want to kind of put two questions together and then open it up to the panel. Maybe Mike, start with you. There are two questions which have, I think, some linkage. One was around the enormity of climate change, the time-sensitive nature of it, and the fear urgency of now, which is a macro issue, and the micro issue of how are you managing burnout in this space. And Mike, you have worked in government and academia in the private sector. And so I'm curious if I could give you that two-parter, both kind of high level, and then you personally, how you're kind of managing your own sanity in the space. And then we'll turn that to Amy and the executive as well. Easy question.
Yeah, that's pretty encompassing. It's hard not to get depressed on this issue when you see the trends and you see the science coming out of our research universities and the IPCC and others. But I have 3 small children that I referenced earlier, and the reason why I'm outside and instead of inside my home right now, and their future keeps me going on this task. If I'm not able to look at them 20 years from now and say that, hey, I was helping to help establish a future that is bright for you, then I will not have done my part as a parent. So I think a lot of folks in this space think about future generations and how this is going to affect those folks, and kind of keeps them going in that regard. One real quick thing I want to put on the table, kind of to your point, Chris, about stacking benefits. It seems to me that we need to start making some of these solutions very easy for the corporate community and quite frankly for institutions, larger institutions that are looking to offset emissions that can't be eliminated. I'm thinking of things like air travel, whenever we're allowed to do that again. So it would be very interesting for those on the ballot in a couple of weeks, whoever's elected, to come up with programming that would allow us to invest in things like our national parks, our state parks that are needing resources to manage their landscapes in a way that generates verified carbon credits that those who have committed to carbon neutrality could take advantage and leverage in a national platform, a statewide platform, so that those investments can be kept locally where those businesses and those institutions are located. We are looking at how do we offset some of our emissions in that regard. And, I went to the carbon credit markets, and there's very few projects that are available even within the state of Ohio. And those that are available aren't really adding that much value from an ecological standpoint for our community. So I know Arizona State and Duke University, to their credit, have established really interesting programs with communities around their campuses in this regard. But we need better policy at the federal and state level to enable this moving forward.
One thing
Thanks for
I could
that,
add
Amy.
onto that, Chris. Yeah, so mainly working with multinational companies, there's a really interesting trend in the last 4 years. Might be a correlation there on aligning corporate goals and strategies with the United Nations Global Compact. And if you haven't tracked the UN SDGs, SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals, many companies are increasingly, because they're just around the world, and no matter what their alignment is with a current federal administration of any country, they're in many countries. And so to knit together a global strategy that makes sense, they oftentimes align with the UN Global Compact. And then there's 17 SDGs where you can select, which depends on what markets and products that you're in and your business model. And that is what drives much of the global strategy moving forward with a lot of companies that I work with. And then from there, they develop the science-based goals that I mentioned. So that's a bright point that is really increasing. Another trend, especially in the last year, thanks in part to Larry Fink with BlackRock, that released a statement a couple of years ago talking about how climate is a primary risk that we all have to be considering in any business decision, is the uprising in environmental social governance, or ESG, indicators, metric strategies, reporting, lots of movement in that area. And it's where a lot of the social justice, racial disparities are starting to weave in, along with traditional sustainability. So those are some trends and movements that are global that I think are really hopeful, because the things I know that I'm particularly thinking about here today, climate, equity, racial disparities, are global in nature. And so to have that movement and momentum globally is really heartwarming to me.
Thanks, Amy. Executive, I'll turn to you.
Thanks. So when it comes to climate change, I am the opposite of burnt out. I'm incredibly optimistic. Working on climate change honestly feeds my soul, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we know what we have to do. The answers are right there ahead of us, and I'm blessed to be in a position leading county government where we're actually able to map out what needs to be done, put projects together, and see the results. So I see the potential for change because we're doing it here. And I see one of our missions is to offer our services to other communities who want to move forward. Because if, as you know, because you work on the Healthy Cities, the cities projects, if cities and counties across this nation do what needs to be done, which is completely in our control, we can change the world. We can make a huge difference, and we are making a difference that way. Yeah, I absolutely want change at the federal level and at a lot of the state levels, but I'm not going to let their inaction stop what we're doing, because we're making really significant progress. And the second thing that leaves me optimistic is, fortunately, I'm in a community with a great university, and I probably half dozen times every year, I speak to different classes, undergrads and grads who are interested in sustainability and the environment. And these kids are rock stars, man. They get it. They don't need to be convinced, and they're ready to go out there and make a difference. And you know, I leave those classes feeling so energized, because I know our future is, and this isn't a political speech, man. This is coming from my soul. Our future is in good hands, and these young people are going to make a difference. And I see one of our responsibilities is to help show them how, from a technical standpoint and nuts and bolts standpoint, because every one of us in this room, working in our own little universes and then expanding that as much as we can, have the ability to make a huge difference. So thank you for having me on today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Executive. I guess the last thing I will say is the same thing. I manage a team of about 37 folks around the country, I think in 27 different cities. And we had a call about a week into lockdown. There was a lot of alcohol in that call, but sorry, I know there's some people under 21 on this call. But I'll tell them I'll tell you what I told them. We can't work from a place of fear. And I think it's hard, because the world is a pretty scary place right now in a lot of different ways. And so I think it's very easy to get caught in that. And it's human. We all get caught in that from time to time. But how do we kind of lift our head up and keep pushing? And I think very much if we work from a place of fear, then the enormity of the problem will envelop us. And then we're probably screwed. So how do we continue to push and fight through that? I think will be the challenge for us. So, please join me in thanking our panel from a virtual standpoint, and appreciate your insights. And I will turn it back over.
Thank you. I am so inspired right now and so grateful for everyone. And I think that this panel in particular has truly demonstrated how much we can get done when we work together. So this think tank this fall is just a series to get us going. This is building those collaborations and partnerships that we need. So further invite you to join us on November 6th when we're going to be delving into planning for a resilient future, and November 20th when we'll be discussing advancing energy efficiency and decarbonization. And you guys just nailed why the Midwest is so awesome. So thank you all and have a great weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.